When you think about cancelled movies, you oftentimes think of just little movies in a bubble, like something like Me and My Shadow, or I don't know, Monkeys of Mumbai. You know, a movie that doesn't really have any established branding, just chucked out, and then soon enough dropped. But that's not actually always the case. So today I've compiled a collection of movies that were for one reason or another unfinished, but they're all attached to big name franchises. These are the directions that notorious characters could have gone down, but ultimately never did. Please enjoy this very long form format of the cancelled franchise movies. Enjoy. Today we're talking about a cancellation that's in some ways kind of baffling. So far on this series, the reasons for films being cancelled make blatant sense, right? The task is too tricky, or there's not enough time for Mr. Big Name to keep a schedule, the business underlying the project is morally bankrupt and soon to fail, or the content is just the biggest bait for a Twitter storm of controversy. But not this time, as today we're moving on to an animation studio that we haven't really delved into all that much really, and that is DreamWorks Animation. Now, as a kid, I was a moderate DreamWorks fan. My graphics-chasing smooth-brain self avoided the early 2D stuff, and Chicken Run just horrified me conceptually, but I did, of course, get well into the Shrek series. Shark Tale 2 gripped me more times than I like to admit, and over the years, I enjoyed Wallace and Gromit, Over the Hedge, The Bee Movie, and How to Train Your Dragon, so I had like 50-50 good taste. But the stuff people especially idolize kinda didn't hit with me. Flushed Away, Kung Fu Panda, Megamind? But another one of those series I didn't pay enough attention to in its prime was the infamous Madagascar franchise. I saw the first. I was 8. I thought it was okay. Ross from Friends was a giraffe. Cool. And 12 years on, I had King Julian celebrate my New Year's countdown, as you do. King Julian, yeah! And there's more! Another minute of King Julian's goddamn animation dance! But what I didn't realize was that each subsequent sequel to the series would only garner larger and larger success. The original Madagascar movie was set with a budget of $75 million and amassed $533 million in worldwide gross, outperforming everything prior to it and everything after until Kung Fu Panda in 2008, with the exception of the Shrek franchise across the board. Madagascar 2 then went on to double the budget to $150 million and returned $604 million in gross. And then there was Madagascar 3, the circus one. A film I never saw and assumed was the we're running out of ideas on this dead horse franchise. It had a slightly smaller budget of $145 million and made $747 million worldwide, crushing Kung Fu Panda again and not being topped even 9 years on, as well as beating all sorts of other animations from other industry giants. What you're seeing as background footage right now did financially worse than this third Madagascar film. My interpretation of the series has been completely off, since this IP was gaining more steam with each progressive installment. At least the mainline movies were. We don't need to go into the spin-offs. So of course, naturally, another sequel had to be made. It just makes financial sense. And so it was set. Number 3 came out in June of 2012, though talks about another sequel started in 2010 when the then CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg stated that a 4th installment was likely. Ultimately, they will come back to New York and they will come to terms with that, which they will do in this next chapter. Because of the way that movie concludes, there's probably one more for them. It's not much to go on from what he said, and essentially is just Jeff spoiling the ending of the third film, but it does suggest that the plan for the gang was not to just loop right back to New York and, you know, have that be the kind of conclusion. Still, it was hardly confirmation that an actual movie was in the works. Similarly, on the month of the third film's release, with the box office results exploding on the charts, a statement came from Anne Globe, the then head of worldwide marketing for DreamWorks Animation. What a fitting name for her, by the way, Globe? She, hopping on the murmurs of another film, claimed that it's too early to tell. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about it, which makes sense anyway, since the film only just came out, right? Moving ahead a couple more months though, to August of 2012, and as murmurs continued to murm, Eric Darnell popped up, being the writer and co-director of all 3 movies. It's fair to say he would have quite the insider knowledge on the going-ons of the Madagascar franchise. And boy did he have a lot to say. Addressing the talks of a potential Madagascar 3, Eric went on to clarify that in order for it to happen, quote, two things have to happen. One is that the world has to want Madagascar 4, because if they don't, it doesn't matter what we do. Makes sense really, right? Now, I'm certainly no authority on dictating whether there is an actual demand for a new Madagascar. In fact, I'm probably one of the worst people you could possibly ask on the topic, but when I punch that title into YouTube, I see a lot of million views. So, going on further, he added, the other thing is, even if the world wants Madagascar 4, we have to make sure that we have an idea that it is incredible, that is great, that is unexpected. If the audience wants it and we have a great idea, we will see. Maybe. And really, that's a whole lot of words for what is simply pretty obvious. Of course, 3 movies in, you can't expect to make a 4th unless there's somewhere for the story to go and there is an actual demand for it to continue. Still, with those easy foundational materials set, the project moved into confirmation territory. Since at some point within DreamWorks, these criteria had to have been met, as 2 years later, on June 12, 2014, the film was scheduled to release on May 18, 2018. As for the actual details of this project, they remain scarce. From most sources, the plot was considered completely unknown. Basic speculation suggested it would probably focus on our main heroes Alex, Marty, Gloria, and Melman, also The Sky is Blue. Some suggested that the group may be tired of being in captivity and try to return to Africa, even though that's, essentially a plot point they've already kind of done, and one source I found that apparently went unnamed claimed all sorts of insider knowledge on Madagascar 4. According to them, this project was set to be the final film in the franchise, ending the Madagascar IP as a quadrilogy. Story-wise, the next chapter was to see the zoo animals deciding on their future and what to do with the rest of their lives. A real Toy Story 4 approach, just several years earlier. The revelation was going to be that the 4 realized that each of them belong in different places and habitats, and that's where they want to spend the rest of their lives, which, to me at least, makes perfect sense and would be a great thematic beat for the bigger picture of the idea. Or maybe I'm still just liking the aftermath of Toy Story 4. Zoo animals are artificially crammed together despite natively existing across the entire globe. And though this particular pack of characters have adapted and enjoy the company of each other, on an individual basis, they each almost require being set apart in their own lives. Also, apparently Alex was set to meet his mate, which wasn't that kind of already covered with the love interest in the 3rd film? Either way, as the story continues to unravel, the 4 friends would begin to realize that, quote, friendship does not only mean going on adventures together, but also true friendship will stand the test of time and distance. A potential route with some real emotional beats intertwined in it all. And a seemingly obvious ending considering the varying joys each character has had at different moments at each location they visited over the years. Of course, this info is again from an unnamed source and could easily just be a fancy piece of fan fiction, but I figured it would be interesting to mention. It certainly has me hooked more on the idea that they just repeat Madagascar 1 again, A year on from this news of the film at least being on a release schedule and at least existing in some capacity, DreamWorks Animation began going under some reconstruction. With several films flopping simultaneously with many more releases, the production company decided to emphasize quality over quantity and added a new policy to only release 2 films a year going onwards, essentially purging much of their upcoming library. Taken with this new wave was the chances of a Madagascar 4 movie emerging, which is still really odd. Being one of the top 3 most successful DreamWorks productions would surely mean it would keep up high on our priority list, but then again, after 2014, there seems to be a highlight on new projects instead of the sequelitis that plagued much of the rest of the industry at the time. I mean, sure, there was still Penguins of Madagascar and Kung Fu Panda 3 and How to Train Your Dragon 2, but they're smaller numbers than 4. So maybe they just deemed the series as past its prime, or could only see it going on in spin-off form and they didn't perform as well. Maybe the great idea that kickstarted the project into moving in the first place wasn't good enough to keep its head above the water when things got tough. Who knows? Still, on January 15th, 2015, the movie was officially removed from the release schedule of beforehand. And with it being 3 years since that established release date, things don't look too hot for the franchise. Sources are split on whether the idea is officially and permanently cancelled, or if the thing is simply lying dormant for a better year to come. In April 2017, Tom McGrath, writer of all things Madagascar as well as the voice actor for Skipper, said that there are things in the works. Nothing is announced yet, but I think they'll show their faces once more, which has certainly egged fans on, but it's been 4 years now. But then again, on the flip side, DreamWorks decided to use both of their 2020 slots to produce sequels, Trolls World Tour and The Cruise 2, so maybe there is still hope. It's awfully unclear. At the end of the day, as things currently stand right now, the Madagascar franchise ended up being a trilogy rather than a quadrilogy, as long as we don't count all the spin-off content. And though collectively the IP has garnered over $2 billion, it seems the characters have seen their last glimpse on the big screen. Or not. I mean, animation fans have had to wait longer for sequels in the past from other studios, so it all just depends on how DreamWorks functions as a business going forwards. Sources on the material are conflicting and equally confusing, and though we may have bridged into fan territory in some places, I mean, I at least liked the idea. What do you guys think? You can be assured of one thing. This one source of an IMDb page certainly ain't real. According to this, it's set for a December 31st release of this year, no plot is known yet, and will feature an iconic cast of Jamaica as Tyler. No one else. Yeah, that seems legit. Yeah, I'll keep an eye on this space. Otherwise, these characters will just be left out in the ether. Perhaps there's still a proper ending for them, or maybe they've already met their ending. The Shrek movie. Now, don't worry, I'm not talking here about the 5th Shrek movie. That's still going on, apparently. What I'm talking about is the cancelled Shrek 1 movie. Yes, they cancelled it. It doesn't exist. Your entire understanding of meme culture is a dream. Wake up! Now, what I'm really referring to is the original pitch of the first Shrek movie that fully started going into production and was later dynamically changed into the far more familiar version we all know today. But originally, and we're talking mid to late 90s here, Shrek wasn't looking quite so ugh-lovable, but instead looked like this. Woof. Ironically, far more fitting for the themes of the Shrek story, but a little extra away from the movie industry beauty standards. See, it wasn't always gonna be Mike Myers. Beyond just at one point doing a West Country accent in the early days of the 2001 version, before him, it was set to be cast as Chris Farley. And more so than that, it was a collaborative project being covered by Universal Pictures and Amblimation, since DreamWorks wasn't properly established yet, and later on, all 250 Amblimation employees would migrate over to that studio. Anyway, this adaptation was set to be a more direct adaptation of William Steig's Shrek book. According to Chris Farley's brother in a Yahoo interview in 2015, 20-ish years later, originally the Shrek character was a little bit more like Chris, like a humble, bumbling, innocent guy, as opposed to the more aggroed defensive guy that Mike Myers' version came out to be, as it was much more sculpted around the talent they planned to have in the starring roles. Interesting. I wonder how different the overall story could have turned out with this character design. Or we really have to go on our animation tests and found footage, but it's an interesting thought experiment. Though this movie was designed and we know who was attached and all that, once again, a prediction could be made based entirely on dates, as the cancellation of this movie came from one of the more unexpected sources. Chris Farley died in 1997. A shock tragedy due to drug overdose completely dismantled this version of the movie to be entirely redone from the ground up. And in that 2015 Yahoo interview again, Chris's brother Kevin said, the studio needed to do what they needed to do. It was a bad time, bad timing, a tragedy. Mike did a great job with Shrek. He knocked it out of the park. And that is the timeline we're on. Shrek's appearance was changed because it was considered too creepy for children, apparently. And when Mike Myers was brought onto the project, reportedly he didn't want to do someone else's version, so he asked for the script to be rewritten, and that's where the final version of Shrek was formed. Not certain if that point is entirely correct. I'd be surprised to hear just one actor has that much influence on an animated script, but the outcome is very much still the same. Amblimation was then shut down in 1997 following the box office failure of Balto to be liquidated into DreamWorks, and the voice of Fiona was also replaced out of respect for Farley's death, giving Janine Garofalo's role to Cameron Diaz. Similarly, so did Steve Martin as Donkey. That was apparently a thing. Not to Cameron Diaz. And with the original pitch to have this whole movie done in 2D at first, on the whims of some DreamWorks execs, it became a 3D animated film instead. And all the better for it, I'd say. However, in 2015, Chris Farley's voice recordings resurfaced, so here's a little preview of that for sticking around with us out to this point.
You're just displacing your anger.
Believe me, it's properly placed.
You're really mad at whoever did this to you.
No one did anything to me.
Yes. Someone hurt you so bad. Someone hurt you many years ago.
Leave my parents out of this!
Noticeably different approach. Interesting, nonetheless.
The Scoob movie was going to come back. I didn't even know it was a thing until it was announced to be cancelled, but hey, it's been one of the biggest suggestions as of late, so let's get into it. Scoob 1 was a box office flop. I have a whole mini history with Scoob, as it was set to be a brand new cinematic universe for the Hanna-Barbera collective, and I was pretty hyped on the idea, until it ended up being a cliche mess of poor jokes and awful execution. I mean, come on, the Simon Cowell gag is literally from the early 2000s. I was not impressed, and I voiced my thoughts on it before, but even still, it was set to return, despite only grossing $27 million against its $90 million budget. So how does that work? Well, apparently it all came down to the VOD popularity and the fact that it did well on HBO, and so it earned a sequel. 49% reviews on Rotten Tomato be damned. And so, in July of 2021, Scoob was revealed to be co-directed by Bill Haller and Michael Korinsky, and the director of the first one, and now writer and producer of the sequel, Tony Savone. I assume it is Servone.
Tony Savone for...
Tony Savone. Oh, that's nice. And the director of the first one, and now writer and producer of the sequel, Tony Savone, first mentioned it with, "Actually, we are kicking the tires on a follow-up to Scoob. It hasn't been announced yet, but it's something we're all excited about. The whole creative team that made the first movie is still around and back and working on something new. It was neat to create this Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe, and it's exciting to return to it." And though I myself may be less so on the side of Scoob and their final outcome, I can always cheer on for a dedicated team that is passionate about what they're doing. And so this new Scoob sequel was to be titled Scoob: Holiday Haunt, as this was set to be a Christmas movie this time around. Holiday Haunt was set to reunite the pre-teens of Mystery Inc. as they investigate a Christmas-themed resort owned by Fred's favorite uncle Ned. Oh, that's actually a thing. Okay. Only appearing in one DC comic in the past, but still, the clown owner of a traveling carnival show. I guess that's why Scoob's a reboot, to introduce characters to clueless schmucks like me. Still, Shaggy and the gang soon get spooked when they learn that a mean old ghost has been lurking in the park for more than 40 years. Classic. And an interesting direction for the Scoob IP, as yes, it's targeting specifically the pre-teen era of the Scooby Gang, essentially chucking away the old celeb cast of the original. I mean, that makes sense. I probably couldn't afford Zac Efron for a follow-up either. Now, there is an additional description of the synopsis I found that fills in a couple other gaps in places, so to celebrate Scooby-Doo's first Christmas, 10-year-old Shaggy and the gang take him to a holiday-themed resort owned by Fred's favorite uncle Ned. When the park is beset by a ghostly haunting, the kids must solve a 40-year-old mystery to save the resort and show Scooby the true meaning of Christmas. Ah, it's the uncle testing them to see if they're like family, isn't it? Regardless, that was the premise, and on the business side of things, Scoob 2 was expected to go straight to HBO Max. After all, Scoob 1 flopped in cinemas during the height of the pandemic and clearly got a second wind with this burgeoning new market. As for the budget, it was slashed by more than half to just $40 million now to make Scoob 2, which honestly is about as low budget as an animated film is allowed to go, truly cutting costs to make the most efficient project. As for the cast, it was all very much set up, with Frank Welker and all the young cast returning, and then no one else. No Ken Jeong, no Amanda Seyfried, no Mark Wahlberg, but instead, other new names popped up for Scoob 2, including the likes of Mark Hamill, Crystal Fernandez, Michael McKean, Andre Braugher, Ming-Na Wen, and Jim Meskimen. A full shuffle. I'd also be interested to hear how the connected universe thing would work out, considering many more characters were established later in the timeline, but that's clearly not the priority of the movie. And so production went very deeply in, with director Michael Korinsky blurting out that he can't wait for everyone to see it. We're getting very close to wrapping it up. We actually just completed animation on Friday, just this past Friday. as in July 29th, we still have a lot of lighting and things to do on it, so there is still a little bit of work left, but we are definitely in the home stretch, and we're excited to get it finished and to share it with everybody. Wow. Yes, the movie, with its 2-ish year turnaround, had already been completed that far along. You could literally spectate it and get the entire gist at this point. Quite clearly too. And so with a deadline of December 2022 on HBO Max, it would make sense that 5 months prior we were in the final stages, and it's mentioned from several sources that Scoob 2 was practically 95% complete. But something must have gotten in the way to derail the project. Albeit in quite an unprecedented way to do it so far into production, and it all came from yet another corporate shift with a merger executing between Warner Media and Discovery, combining to produce the new Warner Bros. Discovery. And as the new CEO of this combined company comes David Zaslav, notorious for his business mentality of show business over show friends, and he, with the new controls over Warner Bros. Media, decided cutting costs and writing offs were the way forwards. As with Scoob 2, the company will reportedly look to take a tax write-off on the incomplete production. However, it's not as simple as that. There are a couple of odd complications with Scoob in particular. For one, the composers had already been paid, and they are one of the latest additions to a film's production timeline. So, ironically, they're gonna continue to finish the work as they were hired to do, despite it being more of a ghost of a project at this point. How ironic. It's a little dicey. And of course, the crew were not happy with this controversial decision, and we have the quotes to back it up. On Instagram, producer Tony Savoni piped up with, "So what do you do when the movie is cancelled, but you've already paid for the stage and the musicians? You record the damn score!" And from the co-writer corner, Paul Dini also popped up on Twitter with his thoughts. "Yes, I'm a co-writer, but also, why cancel a 95% finished holiday movie this close to fall when you're guaranteed kids watching it right after Halloween, at least until New Year's? Makes no business sense, especially as both kids and parents dug the WIP screening, which certainly makes sense to me, as it's probably what makes this example of cancellation so baffling. But there is purportedly an explanation, as the studio itself also released a statement regarding their reasons, pitching it as part of a strategic shift and change in the company's business strategy. Just the fact that it's being done on an almost complete $40 million project makes it a particularly tough decision to actively roll out. Savoni also went on to say on a more personal level that, "Yes, I am afraid this is true. This movie is practically finished and turned out beautifully. I am beyond heartbroken." But there is more to the tale than just that, as Scoob 2 wasn't the only casualty of this sudden change in direction. Batgirl was also the more notable production that was similarly cancelled through all the same reasonings. Approved back in 2021, this was originally part of a company-wide effort at Warner Bros. To generate feature films for HBO Max, and in their case, had already completed principal photography, test screenings, and most filmings. However, nowadays, the studio doesn't want to make big budgeted projects for HBO Max anymore, and has slowly been cutting back on all of the original content hosted on the streaming platform, because yes, the studio is prioritizing cost-cutting measures along with its theatrical strategy. They are downsizing HBO Max for Warner Discovery. Pulling off of streaming services at the height of its popularity in the industry, truly the smallest brain move possibly imaginable in this theatrical environment. But that is the new plan, and the results of this domino out to be all the more destructive. But first, back to Batgirl. From the directors Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah, they both revealed that the cancellation of their project was as much a surprise to them as everybody else in a joint statement. However, at the very least in their case, their project was far from finished. David Zaslav for this project did decide to speak up directly and explain his decision, being quoted as saying, "We're not going to release a film before it's ready." And by that I guess he just means not at all. Batgirl was set to cost between $70 and $100 million, which is certainly a heavier weight than Scoob, but apparently the decision to scrap the project was not driven by the quality of the film or the commitments of the filmmakers, but by the desire for the studio's slate of DC features to be at a blockbuster blockbuster scale. However, there were additional reports that early screenings of Batgirl were horrendous and unsalvageable. Not that it supposedly had an effect. Batgirl was set to have an interesting cast, with Leslie Grace, J.K. Simmons, Brendan Fraser, and Michael Keaton as Batman again. But now they're out of commission. Which you gotta ask as well, with such a major project like that seemingly able to just vanish so swiftly, as a collaborating A-lister, do you really want to continue associating with a company like this that clearly pushes for the mentality of show business versus show friends and sudden tax write-offs over giant, decently progressed projects? Though we haven't seen the effects of it yet, I can see this having a long-term effect later down the line of gaining a reputation for being unjust and untrustworthy as a company to choose to work with. But maybe that's just me. According to Warner Bros., the decision to not release Batgirl reflects our leadership's strategic shift as it related to the DC Universe and HBO Max. Leslie Grace is an incredibly talented actor, and this decision is not a reflection of her performance. We are incredibly grateful to the filmmakers of Batgirl and Scoob Holiday Haunt and their respective casts, and we hope to collaborate with everyone again in the near future. Overall, this seems to be a disastrous call, with many outing it as controversial, all the while shooting oneself in the foot at a time when streaming services are at their peak. Or maybe the olden ways are the bestest ways. Either way, there's still one other caveat to this story, and that is the sorry state of HBO Max and Warner Discovery as the effect continues to move along. As well as removing Scoob and the latest DC hit, the animation industry is of course taking the hardest hit, and my Twitter feed is absolutely filled with disaster stories, as HBO Max is rapidly dropping its libraries and cancelling projects left, right and centre. The truest tragedy comes from some animated projects that will now be lost in contractual hell. Many Cartoon Network shows, for example, were sold off to run exclusively on HBO Max, but now with this merger going on, they've been taken down, and due to the complications of broadcasting rights and contracts, it could very well be the case that some of these projects will never see the official light of day again, as they've been mismanaged into a cage that no longer supports them. In some cases, such as Infinity Train, Cartoon Network has even gone and scrubbed clean any references to shows full stops from tweets, YouTube clips, and all of that, since they don't have the rights to showcase them anywhere else. Or, as said by the creator of Tig and Seek, it's gone. It's all gone. And it all comes down to the dreadful state of the industry right now, the complications of broadcasting rights, and the sudden merger that is barraging its way into a 6-foot grave as seemingly fast as it can. But hey, I didn't like the original Scoob anyway. Is that enough to cover the loss of the jobs of the workers and the creative freedoms of the shows and the monopolizing state of the corporate overlords? No, it's probably not. Not to mention all the people that will give up on this industry as a whole for how unsupportive it is. But that was the rabbit hole of the cancelled Scoob 2.
Thomas the Tank Engine. We haven't talked about it much on this channel, but when I do, there's always a rabid fan base that shows up after it's out. Well, today we're talking about the cancelled Thomas the Tank Engine project, because that apparently exists. Titled as The Adventures of Thomas, this was a planned theatrical film from the Thomas and Friends franchise, with the production beginning in late 2009, which seems to be a running theme with cancelled episodes lately. We had a big batch of doing 2016 cancelled movies, and now 2009, I guess, was the next big thing. By that logic, there's going to be loads of cancelled movies in 2026, another 7 years later. Anyway, with the director Shane Acker on board, the plot was supposedly going to take place in London during World War II, and revolving around a pre-teen boy who has drifted apart from his father. The son is introduced to the world of Sodor, a place his father visited as a child but cannot remember, and there is a bonding experience. It is a vague plotline, and also a very interesting prompt. Once again, it's the idea of the world of Sodor, quite similar to the Magic Railroad. And we do actually know that this would have been, once again, a combination of live action and CGI. Even the idea of Thomas the Tank Engine taking place during World War II, I think there's some interesting, slightly dark undertones surrounding a lot of these kind of projects. There is a lot of dark Thomas the Tank Engine content, whether it's spin-off series, the horror original books, or the fact that apparently only in the British version is James the Train actually bricked up in a tunnel and never let out again. It's a very interesting franchise to learn the background details of the more I learn about it. I mean, in our past coverage of Thomas the Tank Engine and the Magic Railroad, I only just learnt about the explosive TNT guy that was deleted from the film. Anyway, this movie here would have also involved a steam versus diesel confrontation. And it kind of makes me think, what would they do nowadays with electricity getting into the mix? I'm sure Thomas has covered it in rife detail in the future. And we would have had Weta Digital as the production studio that was going to supply the CGI aspects of the film. And as for actual visuals, we do in fact have a poster image. Here it is. Now, this model of the E2 train was apparently created by Nitrogen Studios, just to really mix things up with companies getting involved in movies. And most of the other concept art we have of this movie is of the train. And it doesn't even have Thomas's face on it. It's very early days. But of course, it was going to supposedly create its own line of toys aimed at a much older audience. Which, I mean, considering the World War II aspects, yeah, I could see it. Why do I kind of want an adult form of Thomas the Tank Engine? There's some fun, creepy things you can do. If this poor character ever gets into, like, the public domain, we're in for a whole new vibe of horror movies. I can see it already. And even more so than that, apparently there were all sorts of extra bolsterings around this theatrical release, as it was potentially going to be the first in a potential series to go alongside the mainline Thomas and Friends TV series. Although this could very easily have just been speculation in the early days, since it sounded like a big project, and so you'd expect it to be a concurrent thing. Descriptions we have from the Weta Workshop as well as Mattel Entertainment Design Group is that the creative team behind the movie were trying to do a massive thing with the franchise by reimagining the core characters and the world in a way that will appeal to a wide kids and family audience, which is interesting. It's another reboot, essentially, with an interesting skin on top of it. Obviously, it's not a full-on adult movie, it's just slightly older than whatever the current age demographic is of Thomas. And perhaps they had cold feet over the idea of going for a slightly out of range for their normal audience demographic. We'll get into the more specific details of what went wrong later on, but still, at this point in the timeline, we would also know that the movie would have been distributed by Cinetic Media and UTA's independent film group in conjunction with Hit Entertainment. Once again, it's too many corporations all involved in every single movie under the sun. And supposedly, the script had been fully written and completed in 2010. Of course, that script has not been leaked online in any form, but apparently it's made good progress. With an original schedule set for late 2010 as their release date, this would then be pushed back to spring of 2011, and then even further to 2012. You can sort of see where things are going. There were also apparently rumors of a 2013 and a 2014 release, and it just fell into development hell. And then the big thing happened. This is the standard ending for most of our 2016 cancelled movie productions, except this is a 2012 update, as then Mattel would go on to purchase Hit Entertainment. It's your classic corporate reshuffling. Even though Mattel was involved in the early days, as we just saw with the Mattel Entertainment Design Group, ultimately this project was then cancelled after being pushed back several times following this acquisition. There are other speculative explanations for the cancellation, including the fact that the steam and diesel concept had already been done in other straight-to-DVD movies like Calling All Engines, and others saying it was due to the failure and poor reception of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, which I would kind of contest personally. I mean, not only is that movie a good 10 years earlier, so why would they think of even starting this production if it hadn't even had a successful original, but I also think this is a kind of strangely beloved movie. Perhaps that's just my weird nostalgia of a child that doesn't understand movies at the time he watched it. It is a weird movie, don't get me wrong. And it's not got great reviews, I'll give you that. But I feel like there's not that much of a disaster surrounding it as maybe the initial cancellation speculation would give. The Magic Railroad has 21% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but 42% by audiences. You know, we're pretty forgiving. Especially when I'm like 3. In addition to the fact that it just got lost to time, it was then buried by even more changes on the mainline Thomas franchise, as the Thomas and Friends series concluded in 2021 and was replaced with Thomas and Friends All Engines Go. A new Thomas movie was then announced in 2020 with Mark Forster as director, with an October 2025 release, and produced by Mattel Films and 2D UX Squared, or however the hell I'm meant to pronounce that. Of course, with the movie coming out so soon next year, and being announced back in 2020, it's probably no longer real. That release date or the movie. Although I do still see Thomas and Friends in development from Mark Forster's IMDb page, so maybe. Funnily enough, there were some other updates to this production in 2021, as we then in 2021 got further early version model images of the model used in the poster, which is incredibly niche and specific. Not only is it just a poster of a train, but we know all about how each model of train was designed. crazy. With someone going as far as to describing all of the differences between the early version of this train and the more new, modern-ish 2010 version of this train. Again, it's still Thomas without a face, but it's now got a brass number plate, not a painted one. There's additional rivets on the valances, running boards, side tanks, and bunker. I didn't even know Thomas had a bunker. What is a bunker on a train? And it's painted to be a more saturated shade of blue. Wow. I even found a paragraph that said, this is the first time Thomas was portrayed with a Westinghouse air brake pump and a red running board drip outside of some merchandise lines, which were features on the real LB and SCRE2s. The names of the trains, I guess, but were never shown to be carried by Thomas. Crazy! You Thomas the Tank Engine fans and your just ability to understand every element of a train is honestly fascinating to me. And then, as a final thing, Nitrogen Studios, as much as they've had all sorts of controversies that I mentioned earlier on this channel, would go on to give a thank you to fans before departing from the production, apparently, rendering their Thomas model in an LBSC Southern livery. And with that, the movie disappeared, falling into its own production hell, being buried over by corporate shufflings, and now the Thomas brand continues on far into the distance. I would have been quite a fan of doing another Magic Railroad. It would have been weird. I wouldn't have understood half of it because I only know the British version of Thomas and Friends. But also expanding things to be slightly older with a World War II aesthetic is interesting to say the least. I certainly would have loved to have watched it, even if it didn't necessarily thrive. But alas, that is the cancelled Thomas the Tank Engine movie. Maybe it's good riddance. The Magic Railroad is a fever dream of its own. Maybe we didn't need a second one. But with a fan base as motivated as the Thomas franchise is, I wouldn't be surprised if they do try and make another movie of that sort. Mixing Thomas with a more live-action cast does make him seem more magical and personal, which I personally enjoyed as a 3-year-old watching this Magic Railroad movie on the top of a bunk bed once. But otherwise, that is all there is to say. Not even any footage, unfortunately, this time around. But thankfully, the Magic Railroad can cover us plenty for the background footage for this video. Welcome back, everyone, to the rare and occasional cancelled series, where we pop up whenever we hear about news that exists. And this time we're going a little bit out of our lane to talk about a franchise that's very much from a different genre of what we usually cover, but there was a moment where they crossed paths with us in a sort of form. We're taking a deep dive into the history of the surprisingly only confirmed Power Rangers animated movie to ever even partially exist. Now, Power Rangers is a series we very much haven't covered on the channel, and there is a good reason for that. For me personally, this was the one TV show I was barred from watching by my mum. I had a tendency at the time to mimic whatever I saw on screen, and after one viewing of The Incredibles, where I thought I was Dash and I could run on water, she was like, no more of these front-flipping Godzilla gymnastic people. So with my very notable limited knowledge, are we leaning on some fellow creators who are more adverse to the Power Rangers field, getting some of their 2 cents on the side to help piece this video together. So as a start, what is Power Rangers?
What is Power Rangers?
Power Rangers is a group of multicolored spandex heroes. They're a team who fights crime.
Power Rangers is a quirky show. It's a bit of fun for everyone.
Power Rangers is a live-action show that combines American original footage with Japanese footage from the Japanese Super Sentai show.
It's full of action, full of comedy.
And currently owned by American toy and entertainment company Hasbro through a dedicated subsidiary, SCG Power Rangers LLC.
I don't know if you wanted more, but that's the gist of
I
it.
did not even know that last part about Power Rangers LLC.
Power Rangers, though, ultimately for me is a nostalgic thing.
They sometimes have a robot that can transform into becoming a bigger robot.
For the most part, Power Rangers just grabs footage and combines it together with the Sentai show.
And they do that every week for 30 years. That's Power Rangers.
And a couple of times Kamen Rider, but that didn't work out.
Now, because of my past experience of not being able to experience the Power Rangers, I've never really had that urge to watch the show. I was never really brought up on the fandom. But I definitely can see the influence of the original source material on cinema alone, on special effects, and in superheroes in general. It's an interesting talk about how things are adapted and localized. Now, the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers show follows a group of teenagers who are able to use special powers and call upon massive machines called Zords to aid them in the fight against various threats. And with each each new season, a new team bears the name Power Rangers in their fight against evil. That evil very often being the very corporation that owns Power Rangers as a brand in the real world. I've heard a lot of second-hand information about Power Rangers, a lot of business nuisance, but we'll get there soon. Now, the show has been going on for over 30 years for nearly 1,000 episodes of television across various iterations, has amassed a global revenue of $8.67 billion US, and is set to return for season 31 in 2025, but no, I'm pretty sure that's false. Considering on the business side of things, there's currently a break going on with Power Rangers, and the company recently set up selling all past props and costumes in an auction. But we'll get to that big ending point a little bit later on. Over the years, various attempts at transitioning the TV show to another medium, such as the big screen, have been attempted. There's the infamous 1995 movie, which is part reboot, part season 2.5, as well as its sequel Turbo that people very much didn't seem to notice. And then there was the 2017 American-produced reboot that sought to retell the origin story of the original Mighty Morphin versions of the characters with a new cast, being hopeful to open up a whole new saga, but ultimately was unsuccessful at making a movie franchise. There was also another one in 2023, Once and Always, but from what I can understand, this was more of a celebration of the franchise's legacy rather than anything else. Again, bringing back a few of the original actors from the Mighty Morphin season, but not all of them, of course. The original Red was arrested. Tax fraud, I think? It fell short of an hour runtime and fell short of fans' expectations. And you may notice that I'm mentioning Mighty Morphin Power Rangers quite an awful lot, and that's just season 1 of Power Rangers. With it going on for 30 seasons, it's weird that we keep coming back to the original one, but that seems to be very much the bigwigs' idea of what makes Power Rangers successful. They were successful the first time, and they've floundered ever since, so they keep going back to the original, thinking that is the true answer to all of their problems, wanting to relive the good old days. But after doing this for years and years, and after talking to some creators in the tokusatsu YouTube space, it's also kind of clear that it might be the opposite at this point. They're sick and tired of over-pandering to nostalgia bait, and clearly, it doesn't work. What do you think about the Mighty Morphin pandering?
The Mighty Morphin pandering has been something that's annoyed me for many years.
Well, the thing is, I understand why they are constantly pandering MMPR.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is the inspiration, the mold,
The thing, like that's what everyone knows Power Rangers as.
the base for the rest of the series.
Which is sad that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is typically the main one. It's the first one. It's the one everybody knows.
So I could see why they pander to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, but ultimately I see it as being absolutely senile. I disagree with it wholeheartedly.
So like I get why they always have to bring it back or utilize it in some way for toy sales or merch sales or whatever.
And sometimes the pandering can be a little too much, especially when there's so many Power Ranger teams out there that people kind of want a piece of everything, you know?
Power Rangers has grown way past that, way past its debut in the 90s. It's been living on for over 25 years. That is a lot, especially for a kids show.
There are so many stories, there's so many characters that are now being missed out on because Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is deemed more important.
A lot of people actually compare Mighty Morphin Power Rangers to Gen 1ers from Pokemon because a lot of people really like the first one and they don't want to learn or really go with the new ones.
But I also feel from a corporate sense that it does kind of make sense. It's the most popular thing from the show.
Hasbro, the big people on top, know that too, so that's why they pander to Mighty Morphin.
I've described it that they're like grasping on for dear life to what once was. They have not left that period of time.
A fan base in the general audience that remembers, oh, when I was a kid I saw SPD or I saw Dino Thunder, and I feel like they would also appreciate some pandering to them too, some 2000s pandering.
Yeah, it's a shame though. It's a shame that they can't be confident in their own shows.
Considering as well, Power Rangers is specifically a adaptation of the Super Sentai series, to have them not take the new Super Sentai content and instead warp it back to Power Rangers 1, it kind of ends up making a feedback loop that's far inferior when they have literally the source material ever blooming on the side that they could always take from. But from a business perspective, and according to the fans, they're always screwing it up. It is also surprising that for a franchise produced for kids, an animated project has yet to actually make it to the screen, big or TV. But at least there was an attempt once, as it's been revealed that the closest we ever got was Power Rangers Origins, an animated retelling of the original Mighty Morphin days of the series, again, but was ultimately shelved, supposedly in favor of the live-action big screen version. But what exactly happened here? Tell us about the animated project.
There aren't too many details out there about this animated project.
Now, the animated project has took in multiple forms throughout the years. At first it was a TV show, then it was a movie.
I remember seeing that one trailer that like got leaked a while ago.
But again, a lot of the details are kept under wraps. The big businesses probably don't want us to know about that stuff.
What I can say and what I remember is that there was a lot of hype and worry in the fandom back then, because when it was first coming around as a rumor the show was about to end and everybody thought that they were going to move into animation. Then that didn't happen and people continued speculating. Then Saban bought it back up for the movie and people were like, oh yeah, this is awesome. But then they stopped it to work on a live action movie.
We knew, like, I think someone who was writing it and maybe a director, but that was pretty much as far as we know.
So it's been in the thoughts of the fandom for multiple years, and considering they have done animation styles before and video game adaptations, and as well as, you know, comic book drawings, it kind of makes sense for Power Rangers to go animated.
Ultimately, from looking at the trailer, I can tell that there's loads of like miraculous ladybugs influences. I can see where the roots would have been. I've like noticed things in the trailer that are different, like some design choices are different. So it's interesting to see what they've kept and what they've taken away.
Some of the posters just didn't look very good. I know we're judging like a whole animated film off the posters, but like obviously that's kind of all we have. I mean, I'm sure the animation would have been fine. I'm sure it would have been a fine movie.
But ultimately, I think it would have been a good idea.
I think they kind of needed to treat the source material with some level of respect that it didn't seem like they were doing in at least the posters. And if you're not doing that in the posters,
it seems that anytime they try to make a project like that, it would just kind of fall short.
I would have been hyped if that was coming out.
From scraping the internet for any information, it seems that production started as early as 2011 on this version, which was also known back then as Power Rangers 3D. The animation was being handled by Zag Entertainment, who would later produce the Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir series, and by the footage, you could see the similarities. Supposedly, the project never reached active production stages and was shelved as soon as 2012, 1 year later, but not before the production of a concept trailer, which you can be seeing played through this. No one even knew this movie was in development until the concept trailer leaked online one day, posted a year later in 2013, but not discovered really until 2015. Saban apparently went into crisis mode when it leaked, trying to pull down everything, but this is the internet after all. Maybe nowadays they'll try and sell it. Just show us everything if you're getting rid of everything. The trailer promised the insane action that the live-action series prided itself on, whilst giving it a distinctive flair. The animation allowing for more expressive and anime-style attacks, which would have worked, even maybe bringing more of the original Japanese comedy included into the stories that Saban and all past owners deemed too silly for an American audience. The trailer itself shows off the original 5 teenagers, Jason as the Red Ranger, Trini as the Yellow, Billy as Blue, Kimberly as Pink, and finally Zack as Black. As pointed out by the fans, there are a few differences to the original. For example, the change in weapon, or lack thereof, using energy attacks instead of based on their Zords, such as wings and claws, and another difference is that there seems to be a morpher or wrist power-up that they use while in action, and finally we see the Megazord in its full glory with wings instead of horns. Not quite a replica, but still looks amazing in this animation style. There seems to be a Monster of the Week, which as expected grows to Megazord heights like in the originals, starting off small to replicate the episodic storytelling. However, I don't know what this monster is in reference to. I couldn't find it anywhere. Do you have any idea? Or perhaps if one of you recognizes it, feel free to monologue it to me, because anything Power Rangers I need to consume. I know almost nothing. And final comment on this that we did get is one line from one of the characters.
Check out our new look. So, Do you like it?
Trini pulling off her helmet to show the new character design, and it's not too bad. And there are some questions that open up from seeing this trailer, since it's only a concept, like will we see or get a homage to Tommy the Green Ranger, as even in the 2017 movie, though he was just teased at the end of the movie? Is the movie pushed forward by the villainous faction led by Rita Repulsa? You know, all the world building that Mighty Morphin had set up? And even more, will Zordon, the galactic wizard, make an appearance? We won't know. The animation, though, looks pretty polished. It's definitely got links to what I'm seeing from the Ladybug series. The character proportions are similar, as well as the movement, but it still could have been a unique take for the franchise to go in, even if it was retreading old ground that had been retread a few different times already. Clearly, Power Rangers as a franchise has always been floundering to some extent, and this was just another alternative timeline it could have gone into with all sorts of potential to it. The whole being cancelled in 2012 thing is also up for debate, as apparently ZAG had posters up at a convention booth in 2014 supposedly promoting the movie. What has surfaced recently, however, are some more character posters, which were posted to Twitter in September of this year, showing off some of the different designs for Red, Yellow, and the Black Ranger, as well as the final form Zord, which to me looks like concept art for Transformers 1 more than anything else, but I would say that. Thanks to a secretive Saban brand, little else is known about this project. What the story would have been remains a mystery, and I can't tell whoever they're fighting is supposed to be from the trailer, if it's even an existing character or not. Now, I've gathered a lot of gripes regarding the Power Rangers business side of things after listening to my partner, Keza Henshin. She's, funnily enough, a tokusatsu YouTuber. And issues with the branding have been going on a very long time, and looks like even now it is currently in a dire state. So let's get another opinion from other creators. Would rebranding to an animated series help the brand at all? Whether it's where they went going forwards or something they should have done in the past as a side thing, let's hear some thoughts.
At this point in time, probably, because there's nothing else happening.
An animated series would help Power Rangers a lot, like straight up.
Absolutely. But I do know that there will be a huge group of people in the fandom that would be totally against this idea.
I want to give a very, very reluctant yes, mostly because I don't want it to be animated.
If they can only do an animated series right now that brings back a bunch of eyes on the franchise and then they go back to doing live action, sure. Like that, it seems like, you know, anything probably could help the franchise at this point.
I'm known to be a fan of tokusatsu, which is the general medium that Power Rangers falls under. Tokusatsu, it means special effects filming, and Power Rangers is under that because there are a lot of practical and CG and explosions, and a lot of these elements combine to create tokusatsu.
I prefer my Power Rangers and Super Sentai to be live action because that's where it ultimately is from. It's you have the action, and it's impressive to see them do all the tricks and such.
Personally, I don't love the idea of an animated Power Rangers franchise, or going purely animated, because I like the live action stuff.
But my personal opinion aside, Power Rangers being animated would help, because for one, it would bring in a new audience.
It would give a show a new sense of style, a new sense of action, comedy. There's literally so much you can do with a Power Rangers animated show.
There have been loads of animated shows that have been successful with the same kind of criteria, like Voltron or She-Ra, the Princesses of Power.
A lot of animated shows are really, really popular. The League of Legends show, Arcane, it blew up. There's a reason why it had multiple seasons and why millions of people watch it.
There's a lot you can do in the live action show when it comes to practical effects or whatnot. But if you have that in animated form, and also when you combine other animation, like action kind of tropes in there, as well as stuff from anime, you can make a really good show.
And it does make me think Power Rangers, in this context, would also be successful. Get a Power Ranger show that's like Voltron. That I would be interested in.
If it becomes animated, it'll definitely reach a wider audience. I'm not saying if it's like meant for children or a mature audience, but I'm saying it'll bring in more people for sure.
Kamen Rider has an anime adaptation, a pretty good one with the Kamen Rider Double one. I feel like it's only a matter of time before Sentai or Power Rangers try to do something like that.
Animated shows may be deemed for kids, but have you noticed how dark some of these shows actually are? These cartoons that are deemed for children have blood, have guts, have gore, have so much more involved in their cartoons that can involve everyone.
It would be revolutionary, and I feel like a lot of people would catch on. especially if you go for a comic book route and try to accompany multiple seasons into one animated project. I think the fans would really appreciate that.
Okay. But with that potential timeline very much past us, let's get back to that auction that I mentioned a little bit early on, as that is awfully recent news. It was announced essentially that there isn't a next Power Rangers series for the foreseeable future, leading everyone to essentially conclude that the Power Rangers is dead. The Power Rangers franchise as a whole, not just this animated project, is cancelled. And what's worse, the people that currently own the rights to Power Rangers aren't making any moves to improve it. They have all of this gear and all of these props and items, and they put them all up for sale. $500 each to then be bidded on from then on. I've heard all sorts of murmurs of Toku creators wanting to get together and pitch some money together to buy these props, and then they can conserve and save them. Who knows where they're going to be going? Are they all just going to go into collectional glass shells from a bunch of millionaires, or is someone going to turn one of the swords into a back scratcher? To be fair, that is content. I would almost respect it. Even the idea of putting everything in a museum and then selling tickets to make some money out of the series, it seems that's something that Hasbro has no intention of doing. They are the toy company that own Power Rangers right now, and from watching Transformers 1 recently, we even saw how they make movies. And their opening logo had all sorts of imagery: Peppa Pig, Monopoly, and no Power Rangers. It seems as an IP they're simply not interested in taking any further, perhaps because they think there's no chance. After multiple bad business decisions, cancelled projects, and shuffling back to the original Mighty Morphin from the 90s rather than the Super Sentai work that's available right there. But enough of my opinion on the auction, I know almost nothing.
I don't think Power Rangers is over. Power Rangers is truly never over.
Do you think Power Rangers is over is a very interesting question. I have deliberated on this question multiple times.
I do think yes. The auction does kind of indicate more than anything that Power Rangers in its current state is over.
I've probably been one of the few who's been overly negative about Power Rangers, quote unquote, dying.
There's been so many times throughout the years that Power Rangers was on the brink of cancellation, but it would come back.
The shows have been struggling, and I think it's very clear. And they have tried to keep doing what they do. However, obviously that didn't work.
Like, I don't want to say definitively it's over because, like, you know, Kamen Rider ended for a few years and now it's now there's too much Kamen Rider, one could argue.
This might be our longest time before we come back.
So it being dug like this really shallow grave, shovel by shovel, like slowly going away, it is really sad. I don't want to see this brand that makes millions of people happy. I don't want to see it die.
They're gonna do something eventually. I have hope. I don't have hope in Hasbro, but I just have a general hope that any production company out there will find the hope in Power Rangers and see the appeal and see why Power Rangers is so special today.
The auction is interesting.
My opinion on the auction is that it's way too expensive.
The auction is currently happening, and I already did say that it is part of the reason why I think Power Rangers as a brand is dying.
The auction doesn't really help the fact that Power Rangers is over because they're essentially throwing away all this stuff from throughout the years.
It's sad to see all these props and costumes and helmets. It's sad to see them all just being sold off like they didn't even matter.
Giving away almost every single thing that was on their shows and their auctions.
But Hasbro as a company, they see 30 years of storage and they see it as losing money because they're cutting costs everywhere. So it makes sense for them to auction it.
This was probably going to happen regardless, right? It's sad to say, it's sad to see, but they probably were going to get rid of all this stuff.
I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's just on a hiatus. You should stop doom scrolling. You should stop being so overly negative about this.
But kind of hurts. It kind of hurts because, you know, I feel like some of those props could still be of good use in the future.
But it's the way that Hasbro has set this up. By not even attempting to communicate with some of the actors or anything, they've just gone, there it is, it's done, out of our hair, let's get on with it.
You don't just give away, I think it's literally like thousands of props and items throughout the entire legacy of Power Rangers.
I think the auction is cool though for fans to be able to get a piece of Power Rangers history.
They are giving fans and actors, I guess, an opportunity to get something from the show.
And some who didn't want to steal their suit can finally, I guess, buy their suit, but I know it's going to be very expensive.
The fact that they're selling each item for $500 is wild to me.
Everything starts at $500. Some of those $500 bids are for Japanese like Super Sentai toys that were painted over.
Not excited to see what those prices are, especially for stuff that Jason David Frank used.
But let's say that Power Rangers does have a future, that it does get revived in some form, or it's to cross hands and go elsewhere, start a new path. Finally, what would you suggest for the future of Power Rangers?
Well,
Just make a show. That's it. Whether it's animated or live action, just make a show.
I suggest the Power Rangers stick to their word and reboot it the right way.
I think Power Rangers needs to do what it does best. And that is throw some shit at the wall and hope it sticks. Try things, do things, like do a show, do an animated show, try things.
I would have said like a year ago or something to just keep doing what Cosmic Fury was doing. Like, it was a pretty good step in the right direction.
I think that's literally all we need. A show and toys to go with it.
Animated show, teen drama, a more mature take.
That showed me that they could do their own kind of thing pretty successfully, and I would have liked to see that continue on.
A new universe, new costumes, new suits, new Megazords, everything new. We need to overhaul.
I mean, what else can you do? Make it a trading card game? They already tried that.
Do an animated, adapt the comics, right? Like, the comics are still going.
Something great could come out of it, but only if you try. Try, please.
Power Rangers is a brand. It's a name. Hasbro knows that. That's why G.I. Joe and Transformer toys sell. They have a name attached to them.
I think you just need to sell some toys. Honestly, what happened with Cosmic Fury, man? What happened, Hasbro? Hasbro, you're the toy company, and you sold barely anything for Cosmic Fury. What's going on?
And on those final notes, that's all I have to say about the cancelled Power Rangers, the animated movie, and the saga entirely.
I'll get you to talk.
This is the cancelled Seven Dwarfs movie, a 3D animated spin-off which was set to be a prequel to the original Snow White, with plans to give Dopey a tragic backstory that was akin to Lord of the Rings. Okay. Long before we got a movie that seemed to have sort of two versions of these iconic characters pop up in possibly one of the worst of the Disney live-action remakes, which is one hell of an achievement by itself, this was the plan. And when I say long ago, you'd be forgiven based on the footage that this may well have been once Disney had their CGI movies rolling in the Frozen/Wreck-It Ralph era, because especially for the test footage, it seems like it visually fits in around there. But no, this movie was set for a 2006 release, and it wasn't a movie from the main Walt Disney Animation Department. No, it's our old friend Disney Toons behind this one, which does seem to sit weirdly in the timeline, because of course most of the straight-to-home sequels and prequels Disney put out in this era were traditionally animated. After all, they were meant to be following on from the original movies. However, on closer examination on what was going on come 2004-2005 Disney, you can start to paint a picture of why they were all of a sudden going for a CGI Seven Dwarfs movie. As we've covered in the past, Disney were taking their direct-to-video sausage machine in a bold new direction at this time. That being via making sequels to movies that didn't fully belong to them from a company who were otherwise saving their skin whilst their own movies weren't doing so hot. I'm of course talking about Pixar, with sequels to Toy Story and Monsters Inc. and Finding Nemo planned without their involvement. An event that genuinely almost destroyed their relationship, their biggest source of success at that time, and they almost threw it all out for a couple of DVD movies. That all considered, Disney's subsidiary studios were going to need the resources to start making CGI movies just like Walt Disney Animation Studios themselves. And judging by what they did actually release in 2006 in the form of Chicken Little, you can see the high standards of filmmaking they were having to follow there. Disney Toons needed to be 3D ready, and Seven Dwarfs may have been the first stop for that. Kinda symbolic in a way to have that as the first CG one, with the original Snow White being their first feature-length film, full stop. A sort of, look at how far we have come. Or haven't, because we're doing the same movie again. But at least from the footage, it did look like they had something visually going on. Like, from what we have, this is a really solid translation of those character designs. If they successfully redid the original with their 2010s art style, this is what they'd look like, though maybe a little bit less cartoony. I was already aware of this cancelled project's existence, but only recently some of the footage uploaded a few years ago found its way to me online that I thought actually justifies a full cancellation cancelled episode. There's the individual bits of concept footage, and then this concept trailer with all of it stitched together with a Snow White 2 title card. And it sort of complicates the narrative a bit, because this footage presents itself as Snow White 2 using the footage with some storyboards and a stock soundtrack. And I have honestly no idea what's from the actual leaked project and whether the rest of it was just edited together after the fact. I could definitely buy it as a proof of concept, maybe. However, the Snow White 2 edition is interesting, considering all the information points to this being a prequel, not a sequel, and also not being about Snow White. I mean, you can call a prequel Snow White 2 if you want to, but I'd wager, it's more than a little bit confusing. Having done further digging, that became a placeholder name later on towards the end of the project's life, so whatever. Anyway, the actual complete footage centers around Grumpy and Dopey, i.e. the two best known of the dwarves, I'd argue. The premise kind of being a simple classic cartoon, with Grumpy trying to get Dopey to talk. And depending on your take on the Dopey character, maybe that's continuing on an issue with the character that doesn't sit comfortably. At the very least, with that, the dwarves, and the casting minefield that this property is, I'd still wager that they probably should have never bothered with the live action remake. Like, no one was gonna be happy no matter what they did, and then you didn't actually have the grace to actually make a good movie. But anyway, back to this movie. The clip is charming enough, not really reinventing the wheel or anything, but it does its job as a proof of concept. Though not sure about Grumpy dressed as a cheerleader.
Yay, Dopey! Give me a D!
Yeah. However, it's a far cry from what the plot was supposedly going to be, as the plot was allegedly going to give Dopey a tragic backstory. Yep, according to a CBR article, the plan here was to, and I'm not joking, to capitalize on the success of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. That was the plan for this Disney Toons produced movie. I can see why they're all getting cancelled. They were looking to compete with Lord of the Rings. As for the story itself, the initial plan was to show how the dwarves all met each other, combining forces to trap an evil sorcerer into the magic mirror. I guess spoilers. Sorry. Which, if you've seen the wet fart of a self-referential movie, Wish, is actually partially an interesting plot detail. Especially with the dwarves involved as well, actually. Like, was that just an idea that never left the studio until now? Doomed to be cancelled, brought back, and then flopped in its own way. What a fate. It definitely feels like there must be some correlation between these two ideas, so I guess you could argue Disney's Wish is just a reincarnated version of this cancelled Dwarves movie. Nice. Unsurprisingly, from the test footage, Dopey and Grumpy were framed as the main characters, and you'd see their journey of meeting the others over the movie, through a fantasy setting called the Old Lands. Completely different to Middle-earth. Dopey and Grumpy live in a village with other dwarves until a series of accidents forced them to embark on a journey to the Old Lands. On their journey, they meet the 5 other dwarfs who join the adventure for their own reasons. The group is pursued by an evil wizard, leading them to meeting a beautifully young woman, Narcissa, a name as subtle as a high-vis jacket in foreshadowing that she's the evil queen. The dwarves bond with Narcissa, though she has certain traits suggesting she also has a darker side. The idea being this would have been highlighted through the dwarfs caring for her in a similar way to Snow White, which I think would have been particularly interesting. The group reaches the ancient city of Dwarfenholm, where a twist reveals the wizard is Narcissa's father, and they have been using the dwarfs to access the powers of the Olden Dwarf. And if that's not mad enough, the wizard that becomes the magic mirror is her dad. Alright. So canonically, she would be going up to her dad asking whether she's attractive. And then he says no, there is someone younger. Why doesn't she just go dad, dad on the wall, you know? Like, Narcissa betrays her father, causing his enslavement in the magic mirror. And from then on, he's just cool giving her compliments. Okay. However, with newfound magical powers, Narcissa turns on the dwarves in a kind of Anakin Skywalker sort of situation. Except instead of the dark side, she's left with the abilities to become an old lady and poison some apples. I know, some real Thanos level stuff we're talking about here. I can see why there are darker parts of the story with a key character turning out to be evil by the end. Very much would be fitting in that kind of Disney twist villain approach. Why not retcon the first ever Disney villain to really bring things full circle? Apparently, there were even plans to have a self-sacrifice / fake death scene in the end with Dopey, before the film ends with Narcissa dethroning Snow White's father and becoming the evil queen, leading the dwarfs to hide and protect their families from her wrath. So not really a very happy ending, but it does kind of have to end where the first movie starts. As for that Dopey tragic backstory, well, that was going to be the death of his mother, traumatizing him not to speak. A development that was so harrowing that the original director attached left the project. To be fair, that's not the full story. There was also an executive pushing him to have Dopey talking, which I don't think he was really going for.
We're not afraid.
Based on the concept footage that completely relied on the contrary as a premise, with the proposed compromise being that there is this tragic backstory to why he doesn't talk. Director Mike Deesa didn't want to do either of those things, so he was out. According to an Animation Views article, the meeting became heated with Deesa saying, "You're out of your f***ing mind. I am not walking into John Lasseter's office and pitching him the Dopey's Too Emotionally Scarred to Talk movie. You're out of your f***ing mind." What a quote. One of my favorites I think we've ever covered in the Cancel series. Because in the original footage he presumably oversaw, that was clearly not the vibe he was going for. And it gets even spicier when the executive who suggested all this then became the new director. There's some proper Succession stuff going on at the Mouse House in 2006. However, as dark as these proposed additions sounded, along with the tonally completely different concept footage with Grumpy as a cheerleader,
Give me a D.
apparently there was a lot of excitement circling this project behind the scenes, with a lot of these details added through other people contributing to the project, to the extent that the original director left, but still. It's been said that it even got to the point where staff workers at Disney Toon were sneaking copies of the screenplay to read for themselves. That's the kind of talk that always makes this kind of lost media particularly painful, when there was actually this much creative enthusiasm around it, even if it is technically just Disney spin-off knockoff fanfiction. I doubt Lady and the Tramp 2, Scamp's Adventure, or 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure received that kind of enthusiasm down Disney Toon Central. That in mind, I'm pretty convinced that this would have been pushed for a full theatrical release like other Disney Toon movies had before it. That being a Goofy movie, Return to Neverland, and Jungle Book 2. The scope and ambition that was clearly behind the project just seemed like it might have been intended for more than just a straight-to-home movie. If Disney as a corporation hadn't completely reshaped itself around this time, that may well be how this production would have panned out. Sadly, a changing of the guards had other ideas. The movie, amongst a lot of the other Disney Toons projects, were cancelled following the Pixar merger that led to a lot of the Pixar team also in charge of Disney Animation, who, unsurprisingly, weren't too keen on the departments that tried to force through sequels to their movies, and the axe that fell on the Seven Dwarfs, all thanks to John Lasseter. Yep, that guy again. A man who'd find the axe falling on himself a decade later, after 10 years having a scary amount of power over the entire animation output, let alone his tendency to cuddle female colleagues with varying degrees of consent. He was the big boss of all animated content for the whole next wave of Disney animation, and it all started right here. They pitched the Seven Dwarfs directly to him, but he just outright shot it down there and then. Years of production, and it was just pulled in an instant by one guy. And considering Lasseter went through a very similar experience with a project of his in the 80s, you can't help but wonder if there was an air of cynicism behind this decision. However, as a company, I think it was always toast. Disney's entire approach as a corporation was seeing a huge shift at this time. Basically, anything with ties to the cheap home media era of Disney was seen as stale as this big overlap with Pixar happened. Kind of funny, this big move was to cancel all Disney sequels, considering where Disney is now. We'll spend a decade making new movies to make sequels too. It's like as soon as they've generated enough new original movies, they'll go right back to absolutely milking them for all they're worth. I just think there was an opportunity here to approach these legacy movies in a different way to straight sequels and the live-action remakes that we actually ended up getting. And considering the mass culling of Disney Toon projects was to reprioritize creativity and originality, it's just a shame a project that seemed to have those qualities in there was just grouped up with everything else. It just seems like a little bit of a missed opportunity, especially compared to what we actually got.
What did you think I was?
No!
Snow White is running for president.
No! Anyway, Disney Toons would get their chance at a CG animated legacy movie in the form of the Tinkerbell franchise, which actually did pretty well for them, particularly with toys and all the rest of it. I'm pretty sure one of them was even a theatrical release, so they did get back there in the end, along with those Planes movies, so they got their hands on some of those Pixar sequels in the end, I guess. What do you know? Of course, shortly after their masterwork, Planes, Fire and Rescue, the fact that it's named like a playset just makes the reason it exists not even subtle, Disney was shut down for good, as did a whole era of cash grab sequels put out at rapid pace. They just leave the main studio to do that now. Out of all of the Disney Toon projects we've covered, I think this one may well be the most enticing one, in the sense that it could have actually been pretty good, to the extent that Disney staff were nabbing the script so that they could read it. The Pixar ones are interesting what could have been, in a sense that it's fun to speculate, but also thank God they didn't. This, on the other hand, may well have been a good movie that just didn't get its shot, which is a story we unfortunately see time and time again throughout the cancelled series we do on this channel. The hard fact is the majority of screenplays written never get made, and even the ones that see some motion still may never reach that finish line. In the case of the Seven Dwarfs, it just seems like they were victims of a corporate shakeup. And hey, maybe there were also concerns about the outdated connotations of the dwarves as well as Dopey. But I'd wager they would have gotten a lot less heat for this project than whatever the hell they were thinking with the live action remake. A movie made to try and please everyone that just ended up being entertaining for no one. Keeping the dwarves in the context of the original movie's timelines and world would have just found a lot less complaints. In any case, I doubt we'll see this project resurface because I think they're just never touching the Snow White property ever again after this year. Probably should have been the approach before they made the movie, but you gotta learn some lessons the hard way, I guess. The Dwarfs did get one last hurrah in animation in the form of a TV series for Disney XD back in 2014, complete with the most Disney XD title you can find in the form of the 7D. That's right, these characters from 1937 are now down with the kids, and there were some choices made with their redesigns. I mean, wow. You thought the complete mess with the remake was a radical departure. There's a new animation style for DuckTales, and then there's this. These guys may as well be different characters, and perhaps that's the idea. I love the image of the creators getting a corporate mandate to a Seven Dwarfs series, telling them nothing, and then coming out on the other side with this look. Personally, I would have been interested to see the original character looks and costuming in this animation style, but hey, I haven't watched it. Was it any good? I looked at the cast list, and the Magic Mirror was voiced by Whoopi Goldberg of all people, as well as the fortune-telling Crystal Ball voiced by Jay Leno. Okay. Feels like I could make a Conan joke here, but I'm just not the guy you come to for US late-night TV drama. The premise of the series is that the dwarves protect the land of Jollywood from threats such as the Glooms, who are apparently witches that I presume are the evil queen presence of this series. Oh, the Narcissa, sorry. It lasted 2 seasons, was criticized for being charmless and not having a clear target age group, had 2 online games based on its release, and then never heard of again. What a saga the Snow White property has been in a century. So there we go. After having their decent sounding movie cancelled, the dwarves instead ended up having a TV series where they looked completely different, and then 10 years later, a universally panned live action remake that seemingly has 2 versions of them because Disney tried to tiptoe around their issues rather than just not bothering with this damn project in the first place. Quite fitting, really. The remake of the first ever Disney movie is the one that may well have put an end to any future live action projects beyond Lilo and Stitch and Moana. What is clear is that Disney have had several phases of churning out a line of projects that have damaged their reputation, be it cheap animated sequels or live action remakes. Just with one era's crescendo being the cancellation of a Snow White project that should have happened and another that probably shouldn't have done. Once again, we find ourselves in the wrong timeline. And that is at least the end of our coverage of the cancelled franchise movies. Unsurprisingly, these are kind of in the minority. There are so many ones based off of original content. Good luck seeing that in the modern day. Though there are the likes of similar ideas like gaming adaptations that have regularly been cancelled, which is another genre of cancelled movies we'll be putting together soon. For now though, I'd best end it off there formally. My name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this chunky video, and I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!